So you're here today for critically reading the screen. Here's some. Did you pass these out?
Oh, sorry.
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 This. I know most of you, but for the couple of people that might be unfamiliar with me, I'm Dr. Jill Parrott. I'm in the English department, and I'm the co-director for the QEP, and so this session is one of the TLI sessions that's directly correlated with the QEP. And the need we see this meeting, hopefully, is that we're focused on reading with purpose, obviously, and much of the reading that we do in academia is very text-focused, books, articles, things that are printed out. But our world is very multimodal now, so our students are reading things that are on the screen. Maybe that's a website or a blog, or you're having them watch a video, right? Like that's a kind of reading, or looking at an infographic, or all types of different things that are available to us. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to use the term multimodality, so we'll talk about that term and what that means. We'll look at some research about reading on the screen or reading multimodal text, and then I'm going to give you some really practical things that you can take back to your classroom right now. If these are types of reading assignments that you give to your students, that will help them read more critically, help hold them accountable for their reading, and just give you some tools for helping them read with purpose if they're reading on a screen and not a book in hand. So I said I'm going to use the term multimodal. And actually, this is a little light. Would somebody over there mind? I would get up myself, but I appreciate that. Normally, I would be happy to take care of that. So we'll start.
You're making us very curious.
I know, I'm sorry. I've pulled something, and I'm a little uncomfortable. So multimodal, at least my specialty is writing studies. So the way we use the term multimodal is like this. The theories of communication using multimodal, we think about texts that include more than one modality. So it might be textual, it might have sound, it might have visuals, or use spatial rhetoric in an interesting way. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be on a screen, right? Like you can have a textbook that is multimodal if it has images or figures in addition to the words. But most of the kinds of multimodal texts that we see these days are electronic in some way. We're looking at them on a screen. So I just want to make that distinction. So we're going to look at some examples just really quickly of some multimodal text to think about the things that we assign to our students, the things that we read, and how we read multimodally and things that are on a screen. So here's our first example. This is
the most revolutionary course in biology of all time begins.
Come today to learn about covalent and ionic and hydrogen bonds.
What about electron orbitals and the octet rule? And what does it all have to do with a madman named Gilbert Lewis? It's all contained within. Oh, I'm Hank. I assume you're here because you're interested in biology, and if you are, that makes sense, because...
I'm just going to skip through there. So what are some multimodal elements that we see in that video? Right, we have graphics, we hear sound, there's music. What else?
Funny accent.
Right, like he's trying to be a little funny.
We need text too.
Yeah, there's definitely text there, so it requires you to read traditionally, and you're listening to the music, and you're listening to him, and there are colors and different, I talked about spatial rhetoric, like the camera is moving, sometimes he's a little farther away, sometimes he's closer, so there are all these things going on at the same time. Here's a more traditional example, and it doesn't matter if you can't read the words there, but what do we see? What multimodal elements do we see in this? Right. Right.
Boxes.
Yeah. So we see pictures, right? We see the text. There are different colors, so it's not just a black and white
Different
Um,
size text.
right? Different size text. There's, there are captions. We see some bold things using a little bit of space, right? The doing science is sort of separated there in the box. What have we missed? That's enough, there, right? That's a lot going on the page. So, I mean, this just came out of a very traditional textbook, but there are more things going on than just alphabetic literacy on this page that we're asking our students to negotiate as readers. And then finally, this is a blog, right? I think it's philosophy. Yeah, so this is a philosophy blog that I found. What do we see here? This might be the type of thing that you might assign students to read casually, or you're asking them to write blogs and you're giving them a model or an example. So what are some things that we see on this page?
Colors.
Right?
Colors for emphasis.
Yes. And we could definitely, if this were a design class, we could maybe talk about the contrast, right? Like it's very bright.
Yeah.
But if that's not your lesson, then yeah, we see that attempted suicide jump out at us. I see italics and bold also.
And are the dots intentional? Like, is that part of the design?
I think it's part of the design.
It's a bullet
Yeah.
journaling.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, but I haven't.
I do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Obsession.
So, and that's interesting, right? And this is a different part of the reading conversation, but what a neat thing to tell them, to make a personal connection to their reading, right? Like, so you guys, if you don't recognize this, I do this, and so this is what they're trying to connect to. This is the audience that they're going for. Some people are going to recognize this. So when I read it, this is what I see. The students might not. What else? For this, because this is a blog, there are going to be links, right? Like it's going to be interactive. I think these are links. Maybe they're not. Add a comment. If they want to interact with it, they could add a comment to it. This is a link here, Principles in Medical Ethics. An interlink to another part of the blog. Can look at the comments, right? So it's not just one person presenting, but other people talking. So again, a lot going on with this, a lot more, especially with this one. This one is more interactive. A lot more going on than just a textbook that's sitting in front of them. So these are the kinds of texts that we're talking about today. In addition to this kind of stuff, maybe a video or a blog, what are some other multimodal type assignments that you give in your classes?
Research and search results and databases and all that stuff. Scholarly articles.
Yeah, which is a very particular disciplinary type of reading on the screen. What else?
Blackboard itself is.
Yeah.
You know,
Right, being able to figure out how to negotiate that, or maybe you're having them in a discussion board and they need to know how to read their peers' discussion board posts so that they can respond to them.
And Gene Clevenger used to put all of the highlights and big bold
Yeah.
letters, attention instructors, all over the place.
Yeah, and these, you don't have to be an expert in design to be able to look at something and go, whoa, that's bright, right? Like that's a lot to handle, right? And so that's something to talk about with students as well, how design plays into our ability to read something that's in front of us. Any other kinds of things you assign?
Film analysis, for sure.
Mm.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, YouTube, I mean, any videos.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, good. I do too, right? Like in my classes, I'm in the English department, but I promise we don't just assign books and essays. You know, they are watching films, and I'm teaching rhetorical history this semester, and they're watching a lot of YouTube videos and reading a lot of articles about these ancient Greek rhetoricians. So in all of our classes, there's more going on than just the textbook. So what the research shows is that we sort of have to do these things in many ways, because this is where that's where the information is that we want our students looking at, and in a lot of ways it's more interesting for them. Sometimes it's more entertaining. We are not here to entertain, but sometimes that's a good thing. So there's value in assigning these things, which clearly you guys are, so maybe I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. But one thing with the QEP that we talk about, the Reading Apprenticeship Framework that we're using, values 4 aspects of critical reading. There's the personal, the social, cognitive, and knowledge building. And so we know that having our students read multimodally connects to at least 3 of those. And of course, I think the social is maybe just a given considering how often they're on Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and those kinds of things, which we want them also reading critically, right? But it connects their classroom reading practices to their personal reading practices. So, you know, like I just said, our students read all the time. They might not be reading the text that we want them to or in the ways that we want them to, but they are reading all the time. So it does connect them, these personal things that they're doing, it brings it into the classroom. It does increase their cognitive facility by building these flexible reading practices. So not just always reading in the same kind of way, but teaching them how to be flexible when they're reading these different types of text. And then finally, it helps build their content knowledge base by using these metacognitive strategies to help them not just read, but also in the end get the content that we want them getting in our classes. So it really is hitting all of those reading apprenticeship elements that the QEP is relying on. But as this says, it requires new skills and strategies because it is more complex. It's not necessarily better, and I'm certainly not a believer that it's worse, but it is different and it's more complex. So we need to give them the tools for it. I want you guys thinking a little bit about your own reading practices. So the document that I sent to you, if you want to pull that up, I sent it to the email. You guys came in a little late. I will send it to you. Actually, I have hard copies for you guys. Imagine with the hard copy that you're reading this on the screen. Anybody else want a hard copy? Yeah, okay.
Ironically, I brought no tech with me.
All right, so we're going to take about 3 minutes to read this. I have it as a PDF, so I'll actually pull it up on the screen also for everybody to see on the screen. You probably can't see the words very well, but I'll get to something that has an image, but you can look at it. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and just think, not as a teacher, not as an instructor or an academic. You're just a reader, right? This is a text in front of you, and you're reading it. I'll count us off for 3 minutes, and just read. You're not trying to get to the end. This is not a race. Just enjoy the text for about 3 minutes, okay? that's 3 minutes there. Now I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do this second part. We're just going to take a few minutes, and I just want you to make notes about the processes that you use to make sense of this text. And if you're reading it on paper, imagine it was on a screen, right? Even if you weren't explicitly thinking about them as you were doing this, like maybe you weren't thinking, oh, I just asked a question, right? Now reflect on what you were doing to make sense of what you were reading on the screen. So take 2 minutes to do that, and just maybe jot down some notes. Okay, that's about right. So I'm going to take notes on here instead of walking over to the whiteboard actually. So what were some things that that you did?
I skimmed it.
Yeah.
Like a gestalt, or psychology, like I want to see it holistically first.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that expert readers do. It's not a bad thing to skim something that you're reading. And I think sometimes it's good to admit to our students, right? Like sometimes you have to skim, you just have to do it intelligently. You have to do it knowing what the highlights are that you're looking for, which they may not necessarily have the experience to be able to do. What else?
I look for subtitles.
Yeah. Like what? What are some of the ones that stood out to you? Just
Damages of reading that we can arrange, like different parts of the text.
yeah. Right, like we as expert readers, we learn to sort of use the visual clues that are given to us by the people who design these documents. And again, it's something we know how to do that our students may or may not be confident doing. What else?
I reread something.
Okay, good. Why would you make that choice to read it again? What was the impetus?
Two things. One, I realized that my mind had drifted away to something else and I didn't realize what I was reading,
Yeah.
but also because I read something and it didn't make sense to me. So I
Yeah.
read it again.
Good. And those are really good metacognitive strategies, right? That self-awareness bit of it that, again, our students may not be able to do. They may not realize that they've read something and not understood it and understand that they need to go back and reread it. What else?
I made notes of things that I could perhaps remind my students of, like tips that I could apply to my teaching.
Yeah. You looked for applications, right? Which is that personal connection in reading, not just do I understand what this means, but how can I use this? How does it apply to me in my life? Good. What else?
I didn't do it just now, but I was having a really hard time reading some stuff for something once my mind kept wandering. I started reading it out loud.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, especially for something that isn't tangibly in front of us. It's a really good strategy. Good. What else?
I usually underline while I read, and I couldn't do that here, so I
Mhm.
would make some notes as I was reading.
Right.
And that kind of helped me keep on track so my mind didn't wander also.
Right. Good. What else?
For this particular topic, because I have an adolescent at my house who sits behind, I have two that sit behind computers all day long. I created a visual image of what it looks like when you go down different paths and make different choices. Like I visualized what the text was talking about.
Yeah, excellent. What else?
I use my pen to kind of, go in a little faster.
Yeah, found a way to make it kinesthetic, right? Even if it was on the screen, you might need to follow, and other people are saying that too, right? Like it's here, but I'm using my body in a physical way to help make sense of it. Good. Anything else?
I looked at the author information,
Yeah.
snooped on them,
Yeah.
No.
Right, like that's helping you to build context. Who is this coming from? What am I looking at? Yeah.
I looked for whether they did test the ideas, and they didn't. So I immediately disregard all of the records. And they're serious. Dismissed. I mean, I can write an opinion piece too.
But you made a judgment call about
Oh,
it,
yeah,
right?
I
Like
did.
based on your own discipline and your own experiences and,
I'd
and
like
what
to,
you know.
did they test this? Did they do randomized trials? Did they run any experiment based on? And because they make a lot of recommendations like this checklist, and did it get tested? And they didn't.
Yeah, well, and it's that's something that I talk about in some of the other workshops is that very often our students don't have the reading confidence to challenge an author. If it is written down, they
Oh,
just
yeah.
assume that it must be
Biblical.
right, right? Like it must be right. Somebody published it, so it must be right, right? So to show them that, well, this got published, but I have serious questions about it. I have reservations. This is a problem. Models to them that the written word or the word on screen isn't inviolate, right? Like it's all right for us to challenge them and ask questions. Good. All right. Do you have any thoughts before we move on to some research and recommendations just about your own reading practices, reading the screen, or what you've seen students do, or your struggles with getting students to interact with the text on the screen?
Well, something that the article brought up that I had not explicitly thought about before is that there's so many different paths you can take to reading when you
Yeah.
have an interactive medium. It's not clear what you need to read first and what order you need to read, and you start clicking links and jumping around.
Yeah.
You can get really messy.
Yeah. It is. I think that it's much more complex, and messy is a good way to put it, right? It's not like I start at the beginning of the chapter and I read the words until I get to the end of the chapter kind of thing. It does get a little messy. It's a good way to think about it. Any other thoughts?
And the websites are designed to that clickbait. Like, well, you
Yeah.
go click this
Yeah.
one, now go this one,
Right.
click this, because
Catches
they
me.
all get like hits, like clicks. So.
Right. And they're very used to doing that.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Let me get this back full screen here. Okay, so, sorry. Whoops. I know that messes some people. I'm sorry, I was just making sure I was in the right place. I lost track. I apologize for that little.
Psychedelic experience.
Tell your friends.
Too, it gets really freaky.
All right, so I just wanted to highlight, there's of course a lot more research out there about this, but I wanted to highlight a few little bits for you. So this article, Survey of Developmental Students Print and Online Metacognitive Reading by Boudreau from 2016. She found that even in developmental reading students, so by that I mean think students who often lack confidence, they have less experience, are very novice readers, they might read but aren't as experienced at it as we would like for them to be, that even those inexperienced readers used different strategies for online and multimodal text. It's a natural thing. So there's some results for you. 4 out of the 9 mean differences for each question were statistically significant between respondents' online and print metacognitive reading strategies. So just to show you that even those inexperienced readers, naturally, our brains sort of understand that we have to attack these things differently. she emphasizes in this piece that it is a multifaceted process, which is maybe a more academic way of saying it's messy. Like you said, it's messy, right? Like there are so many different ways to approach it. And she argues, as part of this document, that the new literacy skills that our students require in order to critically read the screen, that it's not just different strategies, but a fundamentally new way to think, that it's fundamentally new thought process, which I don't think is crazy new information for anybody, right? Like that makes sense to us. So we do have to think about it differently. And then this piece, they did a meta-analysis of a whole bunch of different research projects focused on reading screens and multimodal reading and things like that. So they found that looking at all of that different research, that the so-called digital natives, which is certainly a term that we should challenge, but if we do sort of accept that and generalize it, that they're accustomed to texts that are messy and nonlinear and flexible, and that requires us to engage in that cognitive monitoring, which is a term that we use for what Matt said he was doing, right? That like, all right, I got through this little bit and then I realized that I didn't understand it. That's in reading cognitive monitoring. So their meta-analysis found that self-monitoring and regulation, such as question asking, found more consistent results with a correlation to student reading comprehension. So in other words, that's what works for students. Teaching them, giving them experiences that lead them to be able to self-monitor and to regulate their reading is what really works when they're reading multimodal text and critically reading a screen, because they don't necessarily have the annotation available to them, although I am going to show you a tool that can do a little bit of that later. They rely on that self-monitoring and self-regulation, asking questions and reviewing what they know as they go along. That's the ticket for them. And then finally, the article that we were just looking at, the Cho and Offlerbach, they argue that successful internet reading requires making strategic decisions about what text to read in a sequence for reading them in accordance with the reader's goals. And that's something that we read a lot about with the reading literature. The takeaway for me is always like, our students aren't stupid, right? Like they have goals and they know how to accomplish them. So if they can get away with just completely skimming something and not highlighting, not self-monitoring, not asking questions, then they're probably going to do it, right? If their goal is to understand it, then they're going to find ways to better be able to do that. The gap there is that sometimes they know that they need help and don't know what to do for it, and that's really where we can step in. But they know their goals for it often, but might not have the skills to be able to move forward. Okay, so we have plenty of time here. Let's talk about things that you can do in your classes to help students better read these types of things. I've given you a packet of handouts here, so we're going to look at those now. The first one we're going to look at, actually, unfortunately, I think is the one that might be in the back. It's the evidence and interpretation handout. Looks like this. 2 columns. All right. This works really well for something like watching a video or a movie, a documentary, or something like that the students are watching. It's so simple, right? But it really sort of forces students to analyze and consider and make those connections that we want them to make. And it also, as we were talking earlier, makes it kinesthetic, right? So they can't just watch and absorb it passively. If you're having them do this, either as homework or maybe if you're showing it in class, everybody has one and everybody is has this out in class while you're watching something. This requires that they have a pen in hand and that they're taking notes, right? So basically how it works is that you have them on the left-hand side with evidence. They're finishing statements such as, I saw this, or I heard this. If it's a text that they're reading, I read in the text this. So basically just sort of pure observations. This is what I'm noticing. This is what's standing out to me. These are the things that are highlighted that I think are important that I'm paying attention to in some way. Right, so they just fill that all the way out. And then if, they can move to interpretation as they're listening if they want to go ahead, but it's a good idea also if you're having them do it as a group in class with you to give a little bit of time for them to move over to the second column for interpretation. And so then you're asking them to finish statements like, I wondered, I made a connection, I thought. So that's that maybe personal connection, right? Like this made me think about this other class that I have and the thing that we were talking about there. Or with I wondered, that's having them ask questions as part of the self-monitoring process, right? Like I had a question, I'm not sure if it was answered, or maybe they want to answer that question, right? You can even encourage them in interpretation to make it all questions, right? And then you have questions in class that can lead discussion for you and push you in that direction. So super simple. It moves them from just summary, right? Like, all right, everybody, you're going to watch this video. When you come in, I want you to write a 1-paragraph summary for me. Summary is great, right? And we want to make sure that they understand what they've read, and that does hold them accountable. But this takes it that extra step into what connections can they make? Are they asking questions? Are they doing that self-monitoring and self-regulation that we want them to be doing to be more critical readers? So it just provides a super simple structure to allow that, the cognitive things that we want them doing to happen. Right? Any comments or questions about this? Something, a way you would change it, or something you would add, or how you see yourself using this in class?
So this is an in-class exercise?
It could be, or you could have them do it as homework, give them instructions and have them do it as homework.
How would we grade it?
For me, something like this might just be like a check for homework, or it could be the first pre-writing step for something that's higher stakes, right? That you're going to have them write a couple of pages, write an analysis or something of that nature. Yeah, it's a good question. Very low stakes, I think. It would also be a good tool if you've been to some of the other workshops, you've heard me talk about previewing with students and how important that is to get them interested in the assignment that you've given to them. You could start your preview with this, right? You could show 30 seconds of the video before they go, and it's their homework to watch it before they come in for the next class. And in that 30 seconds, everybody together has to come up with 3 things that they saw or heard, and then 1 interpretation from the 3 things that they saw or heard, or 1 question that they have from that they hope is answered in the rest of the video, and then they're going to come back next time and talk about it, right? So previewing is a super quick and easy way to sort of pique their interest and get them started on the assignment and give them that purpose and goal that that you want for the assignment, so that they come in next time knowing, all right, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm already interested in this. I'm supposed to have a question. We're going to talk about those questions, and I know that Dr. Parrott is going to ask me for my question that I came up with, so I better be ready when I come into class, right? This is a great way to get that started. And then they finish it as homework, and then when they come in the next time, you use it for discussion. Any other questions, comments, additions for this one?
I just sort of had I don't know if it's a comment or a question, I'll let you know as I talk. So for the evidence, I kind of like that it's really open, but do you find that students, I mean, like if you're watching a whole movie, and what did I see, hear, and read, I mean, do they get overwhelmed by this, or?
If it's a whole movie, right, like 90 minutes, 2 hours, and not just like a 10-minute video, then I would give them multiple pages, perhaps to start with, right? Or give them very specific goals, right? Like, so they're not just listing everything that they see, because in an hour-and-a-half movie, they're gonna write a book, right? They'll rewrite the screenplay, some of them, if they don't have the facility to be able to pick out the things that are most important. So maybe you ask them a specific question. I want you to pick out the quotes that were most powerful, or I want you to pick out the things that you hear that challenge your assumptions on the topic the most. Like give them a goal for it. Might be a good way to handle that.
Because I know I usually do give some sort of a grid when they're watching a film, and I usually do like people, places, things.
Oh yeah.
And then I usually do like a comments, and that's usually something pretty lame that they come up with. So I like the interpretation a lot better.
I love that.
But I like that people places things, right? Like that would be a good way to focus this.
Yeah, but I like the interpretation. I'm gonna tweak my comment section to make it perhaps more meaningful.
Yeah, it's just nice to move them a little bit more toward analysis
For sure.
or integration instead of just
connections,
the
yeah.
summary. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Anything else on this side? Okay. We're not going to talk about this, but I did give you the checklist, which you may throw away if
won't.
you don't like it.
I won't.
You might find it useful, just anecdotally, but we're not going to talk about that too much. I just gave you a hard copy of that. Okay, so then let's look at the text-based inquiry questions. That's the one that looks like this. Okay. It's a very similar sort of framework to the evidence and interpretation. You have them, again, maybe watch a video, or for this one, let's use the example of maybe a blog, like the blog that we were looking at earlier, right? So they go through to look at it and just can kind of make a list of the things that they read that stood out to them. Again, never a bad idea to maybe give them some specific goals, right? Like I want you to point out vocabulary that you're unfamiliar with or something of that nature. And then the second part of that is the I got, which is kind of like interpretation, right? So I got out of this X, I made the connection that Y. So it's a very similar sort of framework. But the idea with this in particular is that you're moving them toward a very particular kind of conversation. So that's at the bottom there, there's space for them to make notes, ideas, and insights from the group discussion. So I've listed up here some ground rules for students for the text-based inquiry discussion. And of course, this is helping, as it says, the purpose, enlarge in their understanding of the text. So they start with their individual understanding, and then with the group discussion, they're adding to that, getting that social element that I talked about with the 4 elements of reading. So when they're having this conversation, and you might have them come up with discussion questions, or you might have the questions yourself, listen to some of this, and then the group develops discussion questions together. You're challenging them to refer to the text and challenge others to refer to the text all the time. So if they're reading a blog, they can't just say, well, here's what I think about that issue, right? It doesn't really matter if you agree or disagree with what you think about the issue. Go back to the text all of the time. So you challenge them to do that. With the conversation, you're trying to build on what others are saying, so not going off on a tangent, but Rose, I think that's interesting. In addition to that, what about this, right? So you're teaching them that conversation. You're encouraging them to talk directly with one another. We all have this experience. I'm bad to let this go on, where everybody's comment just comes straight to me, right? So instead of talking to each other, it's always their eyes are on me, their answers are to me, they're looking to me for approval. Mm-hmm. So this helps sort of encourage them to talk to one another. They're asking questions. And the last one, they're watching your own airtime. And I say this very much to myself. If they're talking to me, my response is to talk back at them. And then I end up being the one who's in charge of the conversation, right? So you want them talking to each other. So this is just something that they can have in front of them to go through that process, you know. And it can even start with this, right? Like this can be the conversation starter. Well, in that blog, I read that one of them was about medical ethics, right? Like I read that doctors in medical school now take whole classes about medical ethics, and I think that's great, right? Because whatever. And so that starts it off, and then you get them to start bouncing back and forth with one another and move from just this is what I read and what I saw to, well, what I got out of that is that we think it's important for doctors to better understand how they interact with patients in an ethical way, right? So it's pushing them to make the conversation deeper, to move it from the surface level into the more purposeful, meaningful interactions that we want them to be having. Any comments, questions, additions to this, how you might use it, or adapt it for your classes?
Well, I'm wondering I'm trying to figure out how to do this in, have an online textbook through the publisher.
Right.
That my students have to go, and they're always built in adaptive quizzes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's great at, sort of content mastery, but it doesn't have much of this, I don't think, built into it very much.
The online textbook?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and so we're not doing it in class, they're doing it on their own, so it's hard for them to have conversation, but
Mhm.
it's, you know, I'm trying to think of like how I could either give them an assignment that asks them to do this,
Yeah.
you know, in each section, or put it on a discussion board, or something,
Okay.
I don't know, what do you think?
Oh, I think this could be modeled in a discussion board, definitely, right? Like, so you post the instructions, and each student is required by a certain date and time to post their I read, right? Like, so here's an interesting quote, here's what I noticed, here's something that stood out to me, and then 24 hours later, somebody else has to go in and make a connection. Right, I saw that too, and you know how I interpret that, or what I got out of that? X. Or, you know, I didn't pay attention to that, but here's my question about it. Here's how I'm trying to get it. I haven't quite got it yet, but here's how I'm trying to get it, right? And then, you know, 24 hours later, there's another response, or you go in and ask them something that sort of builds, because this is intended to build and dig deeper as a conversation. Yeah, I could see that as a discussion board.
I hate doing this, but do you know about Peruse All? There's this
No.
This guy at Harvard who came up with this software that allows you to upload any text, any electronic text, and then the students can see it. It's basically like putting it on a bulletin board, and then students can post stuff on it, and you can see it, other students can see other students' posts, and so it's really, it's a digital annotation device, really.
But it's collaborative. I'm about to
collaborative,
show
yeah.
you a digital annotation, but
Okay.
it's not collaborative
Oh.
like that. So
Okay.
no, I'm not familiar with that.
I think it's Perusal or Perusal All, I think, I don't know.
Okay, that's neat. Thanks. I'll look at that. But yeah, I could see this. Especially, we encourage, if you're going to be using an online textbook, especially, but all textbooks with a QEP, we encourage not just saying read chapter 5, right? Or in your syllabus, it just says, and I have been bad in the past to do this, so I'm looking totally at myself. But on the syllabus to just say chapter 6 and then never say anything else about it and just expect them to read it because it's on the syllabus, right?
Yeah.
We really encourage you to preview, to talk to them about their reading, to let them know what is expected from them, like what they're going to be doing with it. Are they going to be discussing it? Is it going to be together? Is it going to be in the discussion board? Are you going to write a summary? Is it going to become a paper? And one way to help them negotiate a whole big chapter, whether it's a real tangible book or an online book, but I think especially for an online text, is to tell them specifically what section you think is most important and that you really want them to focus on. So you can say, I want you to read everything, or I at least want you to skim it, but this section 6.1 from pages 308 to 310 is really important, and section 6.4 from pages, I don't know, whatever, I don't even remember what I just said in the end, that's really important too. So really focus in on those things, because that's what we're going to be talking about in class. And so giving them that direction for the online textbook and then a tool to be able to interpret and use that information is going to make their reading much more purposeful than just you're reading chapter 6 for next time, have fun.
It would be interesting if you did that approach, you know, these are the sections that I really want you to focus on, to have a homework question that's like, why do you think I asked you to focus on those questions?
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's great, because it's not just sort of tricking them, it's helping them to really deeply consider how I read this as an expert. What is it about these sections that an expert in the discipline is going to find important? Because we want them to read more like us, right? Yeah, I think that's
Well,
right.
not like me.
The royal us
Or
all
like
together.
you. Whatever would read more like Jill.
All right, so the website that I was talking about that we're going to spend just a few minutes looking at is called Diigo. I think it's called Diigo. That's my best. I've never heard it said out loud, so that's my best guess how it's pronounced. It's just DIIGO.com. So if you have something in front of you, feel free to go to it. I'm going to go ahead and go to it now also. Bye, Stephen. Sorry, I should have already done this. Oops. Shoot.
Shoot, I hate those. Too many.
I apologize. Maybe that'll be right.
Hey,
that first time in history that has ever happened for anyone, right there. The God smiled upon me. Okay, so this is the same article that we've been talking about just for consistency purposes. What Diigo allows you to do is with any sort of screen document, so this one is a PDF, you can also do it with web pages. It allows you to annotate them. So, for example, you can see I've put a few in here. So this I've highlighted, and there's also, once you've highlighted something, you have some options. You can make a comment about it. So that says add sticky notes. So basically just make a comment, share it with someone. You can delete the comment if you don't like it anymore. There are different options for what color. So you can color code. You can color code. That one's blue, but there are other options if you want your orange to be things that you think are important, and blues things that you have questions about, or whatever it might be, then you can do that. So my sticky note here just says that this is a basic thing to understand about this, right? So I think I just have a couple of examples here. It's not particularly complicated, right? It's a very simple tool. The things that I really like about it are that you can then save it, right? Like clearly this has been saved here for me, so I can go back and re-access the notes that I've made. You can share it with your students. So this is one way that we can model for our students, and the QEP always encourages modeling our reading behaviors for our students so that they can learn how to be have better facility with their critical reading. So I can share it with them to show them, right? Like this is how I read this text, right? So if you've been to the Developing Critical Readers Through Metacognitive Strategies workshop, in that one we always talk about thinking aloud and talking to the text, right? Well, this is a type of talking to the text, right? If it's on the screen and we don't have a hard copy, this is a way for us to do that and to show our students this is how, as an expert reader in our field, this field that you are in a class trying to learn things about, this is how we read. And you can, if you've color coded it the way I was saying, then you can share that with them, right? You're going to see orange is my questions, blues, the things that I think are important, or whatever it was that I said earlier, as long as you're consistent, right? And that's what you do. You can share that with them. Another way that you could use this is the accounts are completely free. Of course, like with there's an account that you can pay for, but the basic stuff is free, right? So you can have them create their own accounts and turn it in to you as part of the accountability for their reading, right? You don't need to do it for every reading. Nobody can get through that much grading and checking in on them, but maybe a couple of times in the semester say, I really want to see how you're doing with your reading. I want you to go into, I've given you this PDF, or here's this website that I want you to look at. Here's the blog that we're reading. Doesn't work for videos, clearly, but something that involves text like this. And I want you to annotate it, and I'm going to take a look at those. You could also have them do that in groups, right? Like if you have access to a computer lab, they do their annotations. They come in together in a small group. They talk about their annotations, share their annotations with one another. And that gives them the opportunity to not just talk about content, but to talk about the choices that they made. Why did I choose this? What did I think was important about this? What choices did I make? In what ways did I think this helped me understand better? And then maybe they could collaboratively write a quick summary and an analysis using the notes that they made, right? Yeah.
This is very good. So Blackboard doesn't have anything even remotely similar to like this?
If it does, I'm not familiar with
I'm
it.
not-
But if
that's why I'm
somebody
like,
else finds
I
out
don't
about
know.
it, please let me know. But no, I'm not familiar if they do.
Oh, very useful.
Yeah, I think so. When I discovered this, it was a very exciting day for
It
me
would be
when I
very
found this.
useful to have it in Blackboard. Maybe Blackboard should purchase this.
Yeah, we should talk to them about that. See if we can get a kickback. But in addition to helping our students, right? Like super useful for us doing research to just be able to have this at our fingertips to use. And then, because my mind always goes back to this, if we have our own research that we're using for this and we're teaching a class that is heavy in research, show your students how a real academic researcher annotates and makes notes when we're
This would be very useful for comps.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
thinking,
for students who are
written
studying.
notes. Oh my
Yeah.
God, oh my God. This would be very useful.
Absolutely. So there might be some more complicated things that Diigo can do, but at a basic level, this is the real use of it, I think, and I think it's really useful and helpful in a nice way for us to not just tell our students that they should be annotating, but to show them in real time, this is what I do, and this is how it looks when I read a text as an expert on the screen. So, any further questions or comments about this?
Gosh, it might be interesting if you had the right text, to ask students to pick out passages that would be important to one discipline versus another discipline, like in a gen ed course. You know,
Yes.
what would a psychologist pick out of this
Absolutely.
versus what would a historian pick out of this?
That's a great
or something
question.
like that.
It also gives us the real easy ability, whereas it's not easy to take up all their textbooks and compare. If they
Yeah.
send us a whole bunch of annotated PDFs, that gives us the opportunity to go in and look and see what they're thinking, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think like this sentence is super important. I wanted everybody to pay attention to this, but only 40% of them highlighted it. That's a problem, right? Like that's a gap in their critical reading for the discipline that they didn't get here. So maybe we need to talk about that.
So how do you get documents into Diigo? You just
Um,
download them?
Upload?
Yeah, there's just a really easy
Okay.
upload function. I haven't actually done it in a while.
Oh, you don't have to show me.
Yeah, it's just the plus button here, and then you can bookmark a website. It does look like you can do images. You download a PDF, or there's a note function. I'm not sure what that does. Oh, so you can just type in something yourself and then be able to make comments on it. So you could put your own documents in there. It looks like right. Yeah, it's just a real easy addition.
And it's free.
Drag and drop.
It's free. The
from-
basic stuff is absolutely free. Yeah. I do not ever recommend things that have to be paid for my students. Yeah. I mean, if I found a great one, I might.
Universal
But
license for it.
yeah, I usually try to keep it free as much as possible.
And going back to Blackboard, I think that I used in the past VoiceThread,
Mhm.
and I think with VoiceThread you can upload images or you can upload texts, and there's a way for you to kind of underline and make notes.
Oh.
I'm sure there are other
And
tools.
video too, I mean, you can
And
add to it over video.
Yeah, you can integrate everything on
Okay.
VoiceThread.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's embedded in
In this
in
version
Blackboard.
too?
Yeah, that's right,
Yeah.
that's right, so that's how you could do it probably.
Okay.
It's very, very useful.
Okay.
Need to make
And
myself
actually,
look
some people recommend grading that way,
Mhm.
because you can record your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can read someone's
Make
paper
comments.
and
There's
give
a
them
lot of
verbal
research about
feedback
that. Yeah.
while
I
you're
don't
grading the
recommend
paper.
I don't want to know what I'm thinking.
For a while,
Wow.
I was researching
Daba.
screen capture feedback
Yeah,
to students,
yeah.
like to use Jing or one of those
Yeah,
tools.
yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
Ambitious, very ambitious, yes.
All right.
Oh my God.
Thank you guys so much for being here today. I hope you've taken something
you.
useful
Yes, thanks.
for your classes. And
Absolutely.
I have a few minutes to stick around if anybody wants to say
These are great
something.
tips.
Thank you.
They
I
work.
appreciate that.